Thank you for joining us for this tutorial on reproducible HPC containers. My name is Ayana Wano. I am one of the computational research support analysts at the Yale Center for Research Computing. Today we'll explore what containers are, how to build container images, and how to run containers on HPC clusters. Before diving into the main content, there are a few topics that you need to know to get the most out of this tutorial. You should have general knowledge about HPC clusters, such as how to log into the clusters, how to run interactive and batch jobs, and different types of HPC storage. Additionally, you will need to know some basic Linux commands to navigate the file system and create and manipulate files. If you're not familiar with these topics, I recommend watching our Introduction to HPC video linked here. This is the outline of this tutorial. We'll first start by discussing what containers are and why they're useful. Then we will talk about two container platforms, Docker and Apptainer, and the differences between them. Next, we'll dive into building Apptainer images from pre-existing container images on YCRC clusters, how to run containers on our clusters, and then how to build containers with customizations using definition files and sandboxing. We'll also briefly discuss how to go about using containers on a cluster if you only have a Docker file. Finally, we'll wrap up with resources to learn more about Apptainer and how to get help from YCRC. First, what are containers? Containers are packages of an application together with all the necessary runtime components, like a software stack, libraries, and an operating system. They provide an isolated environment, meaning that applications inside a container are separated from the host computer. This ensures applications run the same way across different computing environments. Now, there are two key terms that can often be very confusing: container and container images. A container image is a self-contained read-only file or set of files used to run applications. This includes everything you need: code, tools, libraries, and settings, all packaged together. When you execute a container image, it becomes a container. These definitions might seem confusing at first, but it will all make more sense once we start working with examples. What is Docker? Docker is a popular container platform that can be used to build, ship, and run containers. With Docker, you can build Docker images that package applications and their dependencies into a portable format. You can then run these Docker containers on Docker engines, where the containerized software runs consistently, regardless of the underlying infrastructure. Docker Hub is a public repository for storing, managing, and sharing Docker images. If you'd like to try out Docker, you can install Docker Desktop on your local computer. However, it is important to note that Docker is designed to run with root access to the system, which makes it unsuitable for high performance computing or HPC environments. What is Apptainer? Like Docker, Apptainer is a platform used to build and run containers. It is formerly known as Singularity. Apptainer was originally designed to be used on HPC clusters. These containers can run Linux applications on a Linux system. Apptainer also runs without requiring root access, unlike Docker. So it is a more secure option to use containers on HPC environment. Apptainer utilizes a single file format called SIF, a singularity image format, which is straightforward and easy to transport and share with other researchers. Additionally, Apptainer can convert existing Docker images into Apptainer images. So even if the developer only provides you with Docker image for an application, you can convert it to Apptainer image and run it on our clusters. These are some motivational cases for using Apptainer or containers. One, reproducible science. Containers can include all the necessary programs, libraries, data, and scripts, which makes it easy to archive your project or share a complete project with other researchers. This allows others to replicate the project regardless of the environment that they're running the applications on. Secondly, software requiring a particular environment. YCRC HPC clusters currently run on the RHEL 8 operating system, but some applications require different Linux distributions, such as Ubuntu or versions. By installing such applications in a container with the specific operating system, they can still run on our clusters while preserving the intended application environment and libraries within the container. Complicated software installation. Some software packages are difficult to adapt or installed in a cluster environment. Sometimes developers don't have HPC clusters in mind as an installation environment. If Docker images are available for the software you need, it is sometimes more straightforward to run them using Apptainer instead of manually installing or adapting the software for the cluster. Lastly, legacy code on very old operating systems. In science, some codes or software were developed years ago for updated Linux operating system, but still are in use in research. These applications can be containerized and run on newer Linux versions. Now let's talk about using Apptainers on our clusters. The first thing to keep in mind is that Apptainer is not available on the login nodes. If you try to run any Apptainer command from a login node, you will encounter a permission error. For example, if you enter Apptainer-h command on a login node, you will encounter permission denied error messages. Since Apptainer is only available on a compute node, you need to run it within a compute job. For example, if you want to run Apptainer interactively, you need to request an interactive compute session using SLOC. Once the session starts and you are on a compute node, you can run the same command Apptainer-h, and now it displays the expected help messages correctly. For the rest of the tutorial, all Apptainer commands must be run within compute jobs. When using Apptainer, the cache directory for building image is stored in your home directory by default. These cache files can take up a lot of space since the home directory has a limited storage quota of 125 GB. To prevent this, you can change the cache directory location by setting the Apptainer_cache environment variable. The best place to do this is in your .bashrc file in your home space, so that the setting is automatically applied every time you log in. For example, if you want to change the location of the cache directory to Palmer Scratch on Grace or McClary, you can add this line in your .bashrc file. This makes sure that the Apptainer will store cache files in Palmer Scratch instead of your home directory. If someone provides you with an Apptainer image file or a .zip file, you can run it directly on the cluster without needing to rebuild it. We will talk about how to run containers with Apptainer images in later slides. However, in many cases, you will need to pull container images from container registries and then convert them into Apptainer images. Two commonly used registries are Docker Hub and NVIDIA NZC catalog. These registries provide a wide range of publicly available container images, such as operating system images, AI frameworks, and scientific computing applications. The syntax to download a container image from a container registry and convert it into an Apptainer image is Apptainer build, name of image, and URI. Here we provide two examples. The first one pulls the locale container from a Docker Hub and then converts it into a locale.zip file. Another example is pulling NVIDIA's TensorFlow container from NVIDIA NZC catalog to build an image for TensorFlow called tf.zip. In summary, by using the Apptainer build command, you can quickly convert pre-existing container images into Apptainer's .zip format. Now, once you have an Apptainer image, you can interact with it in a few different ways. First, we will learn how to start a shell in a container using Apptainer. The command we'll use is Apptainer shell --shell /bin/bash name of image. This command opens up an interactive shell inside a container. So in this case, we're using the locale.zip image, and we can start a shell inside this container with this command. And the prompt will change to indicate that you are in the Apptainer shell. Once inside the container, you can run Linux commands. An important thing to note is that your user space, such as home, project, scratch, are accessible within the container. So for example, if I type pwd within this container, it shows me that I am in the home directory. And I can also navigate to a different directory, for example, to project by running cd project command. I can also execute a command within the container. For example, cow say moo will generate a cow picture that is saying moo. Once I'm done with interacting with the container, I can run the command exit to exit from the container. Now let's look at how to execute specific commands inside a container without starting an interactive shell. For that, we'll use the Apptainer exec command. So the syntax is Apptainer exec, name of the image, and command and arguments. So for example, if you want to execute cow say hello command within the locale container, we can use this Apptainer exec locale.zip cow say hello, and it executes, and that would execute cow say hello inside the locale container, generating a picture of cow saying hello. So far, we've been mostly using interactive jobs for Apptainer commands, but you can also use the Apptainer exec command in your batch script to submit a batch job and execute a command within a container non-interactively. Now let's discuss how to run scripts within a container. Run scripts are defined by the container developer and are designed to execute automatically when the container is launched. To do this, we use the Apptainer run command or /name of the image. So in this example, the locale container actually has a run script. So we'll run it with Apptainer run locale.zip, or alternatively, we can do /locale.zip, and then also generate a cow picture but in this case, the message is a timestamp. In the next few slides, we are going to discuss a few option flags you can use when running containers. First, let's talk about the option flag --nv. This flag is important when you need to enable NVIDIA GPU support to use GPU accelerated code inside your container. For example, you can request an interactive jobs with 1 GPU, 2 CPUs in a GPU develop partition for 1 hour. Then we'll use the Apptainer exec command along with the --nv flag to run GPU specific commands inside a container. Here's an example. So running this command allows TensorFlow to detect GPUs, and typically you would see an output indicating the presence of a physical GPU device like this. So this confirms that the GPU is recognized and then can be used for your computations within the container. Now let's talk about the --cleanenv flag and why it can be important when running containers. So by default, unless specified at build or runtime, environment variables set on the host get inherited into the container. This can be problematic if you're working on a host system that sets many environment variables, such as when you're loading software modules. So let's say in this example, you've loaded Python module on the host system with module load Python. This sets a certain environment variable like Python path. So now if you start a container without cleaning the environment, these variables get inherited into the container. So these types of inherited environment can cause conflicts or unexpected behaviors inside the container. So in this example, when you check the environment variable Python path, it shows the path to Python on the host. So to prevent this type of issue, we can use the --cleanenv flag. This ensures a clean environment within the container with only a minimal set of environment variables necessary for most software to operate correctly. So using the cleanenv flag, host environment variable like Python path, even if you have Python module loaded on the host, does not get carried over to the container. So this creates a more controlled and isolated environment and prevents any unexpected influence or behaviors due to the host system's environment variables. So for example, starting a container with --cleanenv flag and then checking the Python path inside the container, it shows that it is empty. Next, we'll discuss two flags, --contain and --bind. Sometimes the developer of a container you're trying to use installs software into a special user's home directory. If you need access to someone's home directory that exists in the container and not on the host, you can use --contain and --bind options. The --contain option can be used to prevent the container from sharing a file system with the host. So here's an example. So let's open a shell inside this container with --contain flag. So if you try to navigate to a directory on the host, like for example, if I try to navigate to project directory from home space, I would get an error saying no such file or directory. However, there are cases that you will still want to access directory and files on the host from within a container, even with --contain option. To provide specific access to directories from the host within the container, we can use the --bind option. So this allows us to map directories on the host to directories within the container. So for example, let's map the directory home and 492 project data on the host and to home and 492 data within the container. The home and 492 project data contains a file called data.txt. So now we open up a shell within the container with the -- contain and -- bind option. Once we are in the container, we can change the directory to home and 492 data. And then when I run ls to list the content of this directory, it shows that data.txt exists. Now I will discuss how to parse environment variables when working with containers. So I discussed earlier that most host environment variables get inherited into the container unless specified at runtime or build time. So this is how you can set environment variables at runtime. There are a couple ways to pass environment variables into your container. One convenient method is by defining environment variables with the prefix Apptainer env underscore. This prefix ensures that the variable is recognized and set within the container. So for example, let's say we need to set the blastdb environment variable within our container. So here's how we can do it. On the host, we can export this variable on the host with Apptainer env blastdb. And this is set to the path to the database for Blast software. And next, we'll open up a shell within the Apptainer, within the container. And we can verify that the blastdb variable is correctly set. So as you can see that when you run echo on the environment variable, it is set to the correct path to the Blast database. Alternatively, you can use the -- flag directly when running a container to set environment variables. So this method is pretty easy and does not require the Apptainer env underscore prefix. So this is an example of setting the same blastdb variable using the -- flag. And then you can see that the blastdb environment variable is set correctly inside the container. So both methods can achieve the same outcome. So the environment variables blastdb is correctly set within the container in both cases. The choice between using the Apptainer env underscore prefix or the -- flag depends on your workflow preferences. We'll switch gears and now talk about how to customize containers using definition files. You can think of Apptainer definition file as a blueprint that provides detailed instructions on how to build a custom container. The definition file primarily consists of several sections, which we will talk about one by one in the following slides. I have listed some examples of what you can customize using definition file to make a container. Base operating system or base container, so you can start container with a specific Linux distribution, such as Ubuntu or CentOS, or you can reference an existing container image, set metadata. So here you can define metadata for your container, which typically includes information like the container's version, maintainer, and any other details that can help identify and manage the container. Files to add from the host system. which means that you can specify any files that need to be copied from the host system into the container. Software to install. You can install software packages and dependencies that need to be installed within the container, such as like you can use package managers like apt for Ubuntu or yum for the CentOS to install specific software packages that are required by your application. And then lastly, you can also set environment variables at runtime, which is, we saw how to set them at runtime, but we can also set the environment variables when we are building the containers. This is sort of a slide to explain what would happen when you have a definition file and how you'd build a container out of it and how to, use the Apptainer image. And this is the example container we are going to build. And so I'm going to explain the definition file for this specific container in the following slides. So this container will include a C code executable called MC, which performs a Monte Carlo simulation to estimate the value of pi. So this simulation works by randomly generating points within a square, counting how many fall inside an inscribed circle, and then using this ratio to approximate the value of pi. So the MC command accepts an argument specifying the number of points to generate. Just to give you an idea how to use the definition file, so once you have a definition file called mc.def, you can build an Apptainer image called mc.sif with the command Apptainer build, the name of the image, and name of the definition file. Once the Apptainer image is built, we can run it as we have seen in the previous slide. Let's say using Apptainer exec. And so Apptainer exec, the name of the Apptainer image, and then the command and our argument. So the command is called MC, and then the argument is the number of points that we want to generate. Here I set it to 1 million. So once this MC 1 million gets executed within the container, it generates an output saying approximation of pi with 1 million points is approximately 3.14. So in the following slides, we are going to take a look at the definition file for this container. Let's talk about each section of the Apptainer definition file. The header should be located at the beginning of the file. It tells Apptainer about the base operating system or the base container that it should use. The bootstrap keyword is always required and determines the bootstrap agent that will be used to create the base layer you want to use. For example, the Docker bootstrap agent will pull Docker layers from Docker Hub. Here's an example of the Apptainer that builds on an Ubuntu operating system. If you use local image as bootstrap agent, you can use an existing container image as your base and then add the customization on top of it. The from keyword specifies the local container to use as a base. The labels section is used to add metadata to your container. So this is an example of the label section. Please note the labels are key value pairs. So in this example, author is research.computing@yale.edu, version is v0.0.1, and then URL is the set to be YCRC website. So after the Apptainer image is built, to check the metadata of a container, You can use Apptainer inspect to name the image to see all the metadata you set. The file section allows you to copy files into the container. Each line is a source and destination pair. The source can be either a path on the host system or a valid path in the previous stage of the build. So in this example, I have a mc.c file in a current directory on the host, and I would like to copy it to /opt directory within the container. Once the Apptainer image is built with mc.cif, I can also verify that mc.c is located at /opt directory by opening up a shell and then cd to /opt and then do ls, and it shows that mc.c. This post section is where you can run various commands such as downloading files from the internet, installing new software and libraries, creating new directories, and compiling code. This post scriptlet uses the Ubuntu package manager apt to get the update the container, and then install build essentials and ZCC, make a new directory called /opt/myapp, and I'm using GCC to compiling mc.c into an executable called mc inside this my app directory. And then finally, I'm changing the permission of the executable I just created so that it can be executed. So after building this with this part of the definition file, when I open up the shell in the mc.cif, I can verify that mc executable exists by changing directory to /opt/myapp and do ls. Finally, the environment section is used to define environment variables that will be set when the application runs. So please note the emphasis on runtime environment variables. If you need to set an environment variable specifically for the build time, you need to set the environment variable in the post section that we discussed in the previous slide. So here is an example. Path is a special environment variable that tells the system where to define executable programs. The path variable contains several file system locations separated by colons. So when you try to execute a program such as MC that we just built, the system searches through these paths one by one until it finds the MC executable. So we want to include the path to MC in the path environment variable. So in this example, I'm adding the path to the MC executable to the default path. This means that if you print the path variable inside a container, it will also include /opt/myapp. So we'll put all these sections together and make it into a single text file called mc.def. And as we saw earlier, we can build an Apptainer image using this definition file with Apptainer build mc.cif, mc.def. And once it's built, you can run the mc command inside the container. So for example, Apptainer exec mc.cif, mc 1 million will execute the mc 1 million inside the container and then generate the approximations of pi with 1 million points. Another method to customize a container is making a writable directory called sandbox for interactive development. Let's try making the same container with the mc command as we did with the definition file. First, we'll make a sandbox with Ubuntu-based operating system. The resulting directory, in this case mc, operates just like a container in a zip format. We can then make changes to the directory, such as copying a file from the host to the mc directory and making a new directory within the mc directory. You can also start a shell in the sandbox with --writable flag to make changes to the container. If you're installing software and libraries, such as with apt, please also use the --fake root flag. Then you can use apt-get to install software and libraries. And then we can also compile the C code and then change the permission of the executable. To append the location of the MC executable to path variable, which is located in /op/myapp within the container, you can use the Apptainer env_environment variable. The Apptainer env_append_path environment variable will append /opt/myapp to the path environment variable defined in the container. You can then run the command mc 1,000,000 inside the sandbox with Apptainer exec. While the sandbox is very flexible for interactive development, any changes made to the container are not recorded. If you need to build reproducible production containers, we recommend using an Apptainer definition file to build the containers. You can also convert a writable directory to a single zip file format with Apptainer build, the name of the image, and the name of the writable directory. In most cases, you can find Docker images of the application you're interested in on Docker Hub or other repositories. You can then convert these Docker images into Apptainer images to run the container on a cluster. However, sometimes the developer only provides a Docker file. A Docker file is a text file that contains a set of instructions on how to build a custom container using Docker. This is similar to an Apptainer definition file. Unfortunately, you cannot directly build Apptainer images from a Docker file on our clusters. In this case, there are two possible options you can use. The first option is to manually convert the Docker file into an Apptainer definition file. While the syntax of Dockerfile is slightly different from the Apptainer definition file, the structure is quite similar. This approach is feasible if the Dockerfile is relatively simple. The second option is to build a Docker image on your local computer and then transfer it to the cluster, where you can build the Apptainer image. First, install Docker Desktop on your computer. Next, navigate to the directory where the Docker file is located. You can use the Docker build command to build a Docker image. For example, here I'm building a Docker image called My App on my MacBook Pro with M2 chip. Here I need to use the -- platform option to specify the architecture as AMD 64. It is because M2 chip has ARM architecture, and if I do not specify the platform, it will build a container that only works for the ARM architecture. However, our cluster HPC node is AMD 64 architecture. So once the Docker image is built, find the image ID using the Docker images command. So here showing the image ID. Then save the Docker image as a single file tar archive here, myapp.tar, with the image ID that you found. So it'll be Docker save the image ID -o, the name of the tar file. Then you can transfer this tar file to the cluster. There are several methods that you can use to transfer files from your local computer to the cluster. But in this example, I'm using SDP to transfer the tar file to the Apptainer workshop directory on my project space. Once you transfer the tar file to the cluster, log into the cluster and get a shell access, navigate to where the tar file is located with CD. And then before building the Apptainer image, make sure to request an interactive compute session with Ethelok. Then you can build an Apptainer image with Apptainer build using the Docker archive agent. And this will build a .zip file called myapp.zip, and then you can start running containers on the cluster using this Apptainer image. Finally, I would like to mention a few resources to learn more about Apptainer. We have a docs page on how to use Apptainer on our HPC clusters in our website. You can also take a look at the Apptainer user guide for more details on the functionalities that I didn't discuss today. If you have any questions or encounter issues using Apptainer on the clusters, you can email research.computing@yale.edu. And one of our research support staff will be able to assist you. Thank you for listening.